Or do you want me to?
That's fine.
All right.
Doesn't really change much. All right. So we are missing one panelist, but that is okay. We have a substitute. Hello, good evening, everyone. I am Talipio Goose. I am the moderator for this evening's Creole Town Hall. During this town hall, I please ask that you listen to our panelists and absorb the information and the perspectives that are being shared. In doing so, I hope that these perspectives leave you with either a sense of understanding or that you continue to ask questions and develop your own perspectives. For today's panelists, we have Cliff Saint Laurent, Shawi Leblanc, Ibu Leblanc, Camille, and Leo. The topic for today is about reconnecting with the Creole culture and what that means and what that looks like for Creoles within Louisiana and outside of Louisiana. To start off with the evening, Cliff, what does it mean to be Creole?
Thanks for that question. It's a really good question. Typically, people tend to think of Creole, I think, as kind of like a race. People think of it this way, but this isn't necessarily the case. It's not the case at all. In fact, Creole, Louisiana Creole is an ethnic group. It is a group of people who share a common ancestry, share a common story, and share cultural traditions that are particular to Louisiana. The three main things, there's about four things, but the three main things that Louisiana Creole culture coalesces around is an identity, ancestry that leads back to Louisiana prior to its purchase by the United States in 1803. That's the first thing. The second part of that, as more and more people come to Louisiana during that time, we have to take into account what that really meant, because now you have other people coming right in 1803. So the second part to that is that you are Romance language speaking. In the case of Louisiana, it's usually French. It's always French, Spanish, and Louisiana Creole. So you come from a community with a history of people who speak those languages. And then Roman Catholicism, both in faith and also in the governing system. So I'll leave you with this. With all of those things in mind, there's been a culture that has developed that usually people share. When we're talking about being Creole, we have to see Creole as more than just something that you can be mixed with. It's not something that you can be mixed with in that way. It is a way of living. It is a way of life. There's a way that Creole people do things and kind of have always done them. So whenever you hear Louisiana Creole, one should be thinking about what is the way of life of Louisiana Creoles. I land.
Ibu, I asked the same question to you. What does it mean to be Creole?
Well, Cliff hit the major points. Being Roman Catholic, though I've had discussions with a number of people regarding the exact cutoff time. I think recently I had a conversation. I won't mention their names because they're not here to speak on their own ideas, with families that arrived after 803 that were able to still adopt and mix into the Creole culture and identity. One thing I would add is that there's also an aspect of community, as it is, as Cliff stated, it is an ethnicity. This is not something that you are in a vacuum. It's something that you are a part of. It's a community that you're a part of. It's a culture that's fostered by that community that creates your environments. It's like, as Cliff said, a way of life that you are practicing and participating in.
On that note, Camille, so knowing that you are a part of what is called the diaspora, meaning that you live and come from a community that is outside of Louisiana, how is it reconnecting with Creole culture when it comes to the definition of Creole and how you see it?
So for me, my real introduction was that I was, curious about the language, and I was already learning French. And when I found out about, the reemergence, or like the trying to rebuild the population of the language, I figured it would be better for me to learn an, language of ancestors rather than a colonizer language. So I've been trying to do that, which led me into working with and talking with and just becoming part of a community of people, where, because to me, I feel like community is something that you don't just innately have necessarily. It's something that you have to participate in and like be an active participant, and it's something that you have to curate yourself. So it's not so much that I got like a few ancestors, so I'm automatically a part of a community because I said so. It's because I choose to participate in said community and I want to learn the language as well.
Shall we, on that note, I know that you are currently residing in New York. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
So, from your perspective as being somebody who lives outside of Louisiana, what would be your definition of a reconnecting Creole, or a, for lack of better terms, a Creole descendant?
From my understanding of Creole, a person of Creole descent, I think that descent part just means, or like defines your connection to the ethnic group in the community. It could range from someone recently discovering their ancestry, or that they have a connection. It could be through, DNA or genealogy. But I also think it's someone who is just overall distant from the culture, the language, um, one who hasn't lived in the Creole culture, if that makes sense.
Cliff, being that you are someone who was born in Louisiana, grew up in Louisiana, and only recently left Louisiana, would you say that is a fair assessment?
Absolutely. Nail on the head. When we think about, I know that people on, at least on this app, we've heard the term of Creole descent, and I've learned that starts it has been offending some people. That's not a term that's meant any offense. It's actually in there's other academic terms that I actually find a little bit more, honestly, they're a little bit more accurate, or a little bit more to the point. But I think they're a bit less welcoming. The academic term that we would use for the type of community we're talking about, or the type of people we're talking about, people who have ancestral ties to Louisiana but are far removed from, like Ibu said, the community, and far removed from the culture and the cultural practices. One of the terms that's used in anthropology is symbolic. So your symbolic ancestry, or symbolic by that ethnic group. So a symbolic Creole, honestly. They're acknowledging that one has ancestry with this particular community, but they have not inherited and do not practice the culture. So I think that Creole descent, or even of Creole ancestry, either of those terms, they're not only are they befitting, but they don't. It's a neutral term. It's not something that lends a negative or a positive attitude. It just is. It's just a term that describes people who have for whatever reasons not been able, not inherited, or chosen not to participate in the culture that is practiced by the group. Because we have to remember that with that entire term, ethnic group, the group is the operative word. This is what Ibu was alluding to. Without community practices and belief systems, and that's what really makes one a part of that group. So I totally agree with the assessment, and I would like for people to leave understanding that the term Creole descent is not a pejorative. It's just a anthropological, sociological reality of what we're talking about.
So on that note, for instance, you have in the comments, you have Ali who says, if you're not Catholic, you're not Creole, baby. And what you said earlier about what it meant to be Creole, it meant being a Romance language speaker, being Catholic, being born in Louisiana. However, we know today that there are many Louisiana Creoles who are not born in Louisiana. There are many Louisiana Creoles who are not Creole speakers or French speakers or Spanish speakers. And we know many are not even Catholic anymore. So I'll ask you to walk us through the definition, not the definition, but how certain groups of people, starting with, say, our grandparents, viewed Creole identity and the aspects of Creole identity that made somebody Creole versus modern day. And I ask that for everybody.
Okay, somebody else want to go first, or you want me to start?
It's open to the public.
Oh, okay. I'll start. I'll be very brief. Yeah, once upon a time, that would have been very true. When we are talking about in the 19th century, for sure, this was one of the staples, okay, of Creole identity. To this day, it still is very prevalent. Many Creole families, most Creole families that I know, even those that have converted to other religious systems, still maintain a very special relationship with Catholicism, whether they understand it, whether they're conscious of it or not. We talked a little bit about this privately last night. You know, there are some things that my grandmother did, even though I've been far removed from Catholicism for a few generations. But there are some things that are culturally Catholic that my family still does do. We have to realize the reality of where we are right now. We are living in the 21st century, and our communities are sparsed out everywhere. Whenever you leave communities, it cannot, just by the divine forces of nature, by the divine laws, nothing is going to ever be totally the same. You also find that Louisiana Creoles throughout history have intermarried with African American families and assimilated into those families and those cultures and those traditions, some of them because of a common interest. Those of us who are Creoles of color, Afro Creoles, Black Creoles, whatever term you want to use, we have a similar interest as the African American ethnic group when it comes to justice, injustices rather, and how we combat those things, because we're both equally impacted by those things. But just because one converts, like if my, for whatever reason, my great grand aunt that we talked about last night, who was born and raised Catholic, she spoke Kurivini, and if for whatever reason she converted to the Baptist church, she would still be Creole. Her children, if they're speaking this languages, speaking the language, if they're still holding on to some of the customs, food ways, traditions, the stores, compare bouquet, compare la pain, just because that line is no longer Catholic does not disqualify them from being Creole at this point. There is still cultural continuity there.
So you said that Louisiana Creoles married African Americans, creating a distinction between Louisiana Creoles and African Americans. Now, Leo, growing up in New Orleans and Laplace, I know that you have said on many times that you actually never truly identified as African American. Could you tell us what the distinction was between being African American and Louisiana Creole?
Well, I'll say this. Even one side of my family who was what you would consider African American never claimed to be African American, but there was some distinct cultural practices. Like I said, y'all talk about Catholicism and versus Protestantism. A lot of my family, like certain feast days and holidays that we had, I seen one side of the family practice a certain way, like celebrating like Christmas or Easter. Even food ways, there were certain things that my family cooked on one side of the family, and the other side did not cook that. And even like certain mannerisms that they had that was very distinct from one another. But like I say, um, that's how I knew how distinct. One side of the family was Creole, and one side of the family that wasn't Creole and stuff like that. But yeah, that was like those little points that that was okay. This family definitely Creole. If you get what I'm saying.
So we know that there's multiple different Creole communities across the United States in itself. Notably, there's one in California, Texas, Chicago, and the list can go on. Now, Xiaowei, being in New York, I will ask, have you seen any differences from in your interactions knowing that you grew up with a family that practiced Creole culture, and you still have family in Cane River to this day that do speak the language? What are the differences that you see?
Just so I understand the question, right? You're saying what's the difference between people who were raised in Louisiana and Creole people who were raised in other states?
The difference that you see when it comes to your culture versus folks who are not a part of your culture,
Hmm.
and specifically referring to other Black Americans.
Oh, okay. In terms of like other Black Americans, so being in New York, I'm in close proximity to so many different cultures, specifically different Black ethnic groups. But what I have noticed that Creole people, or I guess just like me and my Creole family, we share a lot of similarities with the Afro Latino people here in terms of like our values, the way that our family, like the family dynamics are very similar. When I am with those who identify as African American, I wouldn't say there's like this big difference between us, but I do see that. I'm trying to say this in a nice way. Um, hmm. I would just say that certain other ethnic groups don't have the same familial dynamics. I could just say that, but also like there isn't much of an importance on linguistic or like language retention or just like culture, if that makes sense. But I do think that relationship to culture is shaped by where we are geographically. Like, I feel like Black Americans live, or like people who ethnically identify as African American or Black American live in a context where their culture is everywhere. So they don't really need to or have to engage with it in the same way that someone like me who's living in New York feels the need to. Like for me, I cook my traditional foods nonstop for my friends, co-workers. I tell them about certain traditions. I'm always in Louisiana, so that I tell them exactly the reasons why I'm going down there, and I share a lot about my culture. But I do see that my counterparts, that is not something that they necessarily. Those are conversations that they don't necessarily engage in. So I would say that very superficial differences.
And I know, as Cami said, that she has been one of the reasons why she has started reconnecting is actually through language itself and wanting to speak the language of her ancestors. I posed that question to Ibu. Ibu, do you think language is a requirement when it comes to reconnecting with Louisiana Creole culture?
I don't. I believe that we probably had this discussion many times. I don't believe that in today's society in America that we can have the requirement that you have to speak French or Corivini or Spanish in an environment that demands proficiency in English or where there's no economic value. Not obviously not in our community. In our community, of course, there is a more cultural sentimental value, but in terms of like uh, the economy and how things, I guess, are works in a more Americanized, globalized society, the languages that we speak, the dialects of these languages that we speak, aren't as valued. So we can't put in today's society a requirement on people within the community, especially not those that are in the process of reconnecting with Creole identity that they have to be fluent in these languages. However, just as Catholicism, we were touching on before, there's still a role for these elements in our culture. There's certain things like if it's the dishes that we make or stories, certain characters. It is these bits and pieces of language that are still incorporated in aspects of our culture, despite being a good part of the community being more Anglophone and Americanized. I do come from a more privileged position, having been raised with Louisiana French. But even though I would love for us to have a society where everyone speaks either, Louisiana French, Louisiana Creole, we can have that in stores or in government, it's not a realistic requirement for today's members of our community.
So, Cliff, being that you have worked in the Creole revitalization movement for over 2 decades, in your opinion, what is the role of the Creole language when it comes to reconnecting and for Louisiana Creoles who are still on the exact same land that their folks have lived for generations?
Okay, that's a good question. I think it ties into what Ibu was just saying. There's not an economic relevance there, but there is certainly a deep-seated cultural one. I believe that it's important. I'm never going to dismiss anybody's association with being Louisiana Creole because they don't speak the language, even if they never speak the language. I have a personal friend. His mother is very, very sick right now. She's dealing with Alzheimer's, and her first language was Kudivini, and none of her kids speak it. None of them care to speak it. Now, these are still Creole children, but we're so very close to a generation that still spoke this as a native tongue and as a monolingual tongue is what I want to say. But they have to call me so that they can, whenever she kind of relapses and she can't remember past a certain age, she starts speaking only in Kudivini, and they have to call me to see what she's saying. I think that language cannot be stripped away from the people. Now, Creole isn't exactly the same thing, but I do want to give an analogy I like to give. The French are called so because they speak French. The Germans are called so because they speak German. Now, obviously, they have a nationhood, right, that shares the same name as the people. But what separates those people, what gives these people a distinct, unique identity is the fact that they have a language that their people are called by. So I think that you cannot strip away the language from the people, because when you do that, the people do become something else. And I think we see it evidenced in a lot of the conversations that we have with people who identify as African American, Black American, and also Louisiana Creole, and they simply they report not having the same worldview, not having the same opinions or belief systems as we who are on the panel who speak the language. This is what language does. It's not a good or a bad thing. It's a different experience because language is worldview. Language is perspective. Language is perception. American Anglophone, English-speaking peoples see the world differently than Lusophone-speaking peoples, than Hispanophones, than Francophones, than Creolophones. There's a different worldview that comes with these different groups because language informs how the people believe. Language informs how the people think. So I think that it is very important in order to preserve the culture, in order to preserve the customs and traditions. I'm never going to take anybody's right to be Creole away, but I think it's imperative that as many people that can learn this language, because it just inextricably connects you to who the people have always been.
Kami, being somebody that is...
And I hope that answered the question. I'm sorry.
Oh, it did. Kami, being somebody that is actively relearning, trying to learn their heritage language, what do you think are the obstacles for folks such as yourself who are not from a Creole community and who are reconnecting through language. What do you think are some of the obstacles when it comes to trying to understand what the Creole community actually is today?
So, hmm, I would say obstacles to trying to understand through language would be just lack of people to talk to in person, for one. Um, Not having grown up hearing it, because while there were, people in the past, it wasn't anybody in my lifetime, because like I'm the product of two migrations. So, um, but again, like the Discord is helpful, the classes are helpful when we hold lives and I can hear that said and like speak with people. That's also helpful. So just again, being able to just be an active participant and talk to people, even if I'm talking to people in English, exactly, not being around it daily. I'm able to talk to people in English and get to know them and know where Corivini is going to be spoken so that I can know to be there, then and practice more and more, then that will make it easier. And I think yeah, it's going slower than I would have liked, but I mean, I think I'm getting better at it slowly and I'm trying.
Leo, being from a community that is very close to the metropolitan city, the great city of New Orleans, I know you have saw a lot of change in your lifetime. Um, how do you think this change has reflected in the practices of Louisiana Creoles in the New Orleans metro area?
Oh, that's a good question. I could take you 21 years ago from Hurricane Katrina. Uh, had a effect a whole lot about our culture. In my time, as my 34 years living, it put a whole strain on how a lot of our youth was having a very different experience how we was growing up, how we lived communally compared to how we live today versus the yesteryears of post pre Katrina and stuff like that. So a lot of our food ways taste different compared to now. On how, like I say, how we congregate, you still see it. It's still there, but a lot of the people of my generation and older say it's a totally experience because, like I say, the Creole community also I grew up in. Like I say, a lot of families are moved away, and I tell people when you can have so many attributes of your culture. You can have the food, you can have the music, the dances, the spirituality, the language, and all that. But when you don't have a living, thriving community, you don't have a culture, a people, right? So community and people have to exist for all that to be, if you get what I'm saying. So, and like I said, and a lot of our elders are not, they're up in age. They're, we losing them. So it's like, and certain people not talking to people no more in the way that we used to. So now we need to be in arms with our people and learn about from each other because, like I said, somebody in that on that one street, on that one house, or just the person on the corner has so much of cultural knowledge about our people and stuff like that. And we need to get in, these people into a position where it will provide information for the future and stuff like that. So I'm gonna land right there.
With that being said, we know that Katrina has displaced a lot of Louisianians, specifically around the New Orleans area. However, like Cami said, there has been the Great Migration, both migrations. There has been Louisianians who have left the state to explore other options, economic, or to escape prejudice. Now, with that being said, we know that these groups bring to their new communities what they have always held on to. One question that was asked earlier is about colorism. Hibu, I know that you come from the Cane River community, and even within Louisiana, Cane River gets a bad rap about this. Can you explain why this might be?
This is probably a tough question to say why this came to be in Cane River specifically. I can only speak for my family there. It wasn't necessarily about colorism, but I'm pretty sure from an outward perspective, if you heard my mama or her cousins or whatever speaking, for someone from an outside perspective who wasn't Creole it would come off as being colorist or othering. I believe I even have a video on my profile. In my family, it was mainly the word black was never used to describe someone within the family. Despite, I mean, my picture is here. You know what I look like. it it wasn't a word for someone who was in our family who was Creole. But from my perspective, at least how I understand it as an adult now, was more that was mainly a cultural distinction. And I'm not sure if it came river, or at least from my family, that's how it was picked up, of them calling other people black and they don't do whatever, or someone's a black worker, a black mailman. I don't know too much about colorism if it comes to Cane River, at least not in my family. I am currently living in New Orleans, and I do know that actually, at least within the Creole community here, that is a big uh, topic. And I do know that people today in New Orleans, even hearing it, I won't say daily, but often enough, that people associate being mixed, having colored eyes, with being Creole, and that those that don't align with this stereotype are not considered Creole or not Creole enough. And I can only surmise that that is due to Americanization, and that distinction of either you're black or you're white. So those that found themselves in the middle, obviously you have the choice at a time where it was preferable to be white. You would try to align yourself more with that identity. So in that, you would try to other yourself from those that look black. Even if there were people that were dark skinned and that were Creole, you try to other yourself from that part or segment of your community, to just have a better livelihood. And I think that just stuck on even to today's society in major cities like New Orleans.
Cliff, on that note, Creoles, we know that Creoles have historically used other terms such as milat, such as briquet. Why, with this Americanization, why with this American concept of black and white, might they try to avoid, and specifically speaking about older Creoles, why might they try to avoid calling themselves or identifying as black?
That last part again, why would they try to
Why might they try to avoid
being called
calling
black?
them being called black? Yes.
Yes, and call themselves back. Excellent question. Let me speak to the first part you asked, because I think there's two potentially insightful answers in this. So, when we think about the terms, the various physical descriptors that have been used really around all of the Americas, but specifically the way that they've been used in Louisiana, we're not blood quantums as we tend to think of them when it comes to the rest of the Americas, specifically, I guess, the U.S. Dr. Landry, who unfortunately he's not here, he was supposed to be here tonight. This has been a great question for him because his doctoral thesis, in fact, proved this, that these were not, that they were only physical descriptors describing the way that people look. Now, to answer the question of why they might avoid that, such a wonderful question. It's because it was an American twofold. The first thing is that you're talking about a group of people who had already decided who they were, who had already decided how they were called, and it didn't have anything to do with having European ancestry or having indigenous ancestry or having African ancestry. The French were the Latin colonizers were just a little bit different in that regard than were British, English speaking colonizers. They didn't exactly see the world the same, which is what we're talking about. It goes back to what I was talking about with language, right? Language informs your perspective. And we see that, and I'm going to get to the point, but just as another tangent that allowed for more expression, the Catholic Church allowed for more expression than Protestants did. So to loop that back around to the language, somebody said they can't hear me.
So you cut off, and you went teacup, so you might have to like revert that back.
Oh wow, what's the last thing you heard?
Um, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was American, and then it just stopped.
Oh wow, damn, that was okay. Wow, okay.
Yeah, you were out for like 30 seconds.
Dang, I said a lot. Okay, let me try to backtrack it. So I talked about how, number one, we didn't use the terms in the ways that the U.S. has used them, that the way that our Anglo oppressors have used them. Can y'all hear me still?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yep.
Okay. We didn't use the terms the way, and that was shown in Dr. Landry's thesis I mentioned. Um, and I started to make a parallel. It sounds like a tangent, but it's going to connect to the greater point. It ties back into how language is tied to worldview. So, for example, the reason why Black people, Afro Creoles, Black Creoles, African descendant Creoles were able to hold on to our spiritual practices was because, and I said it feels a little weird to say thankfully, but without emotion attached, it's simply because the French and the Spanish, the Romance speaking colonizers allowed for more expression. We were allowed to express ourselves. And so the tradition that you see happening every Sunday in Congo Square has been happening since we were yet in chains. And so what the parallel I want to make to that with identification is it shows that we have always had a way that we identified ourselves. We had already chosen, our people decided how they would identify themselves. So when you come in and now you're saying that you are either black or white, this is not something that Creoles decided for themselves, and it's not something that they necessarily wanted because it was something that was foreign to them. Already, it's in another language that they don't speak. The common tongue at the time was not the English language. It was French, and it was Creole, and then Spanish as well. And so the idea that these Americans who are now coming in, they're taking over our land, they're taking over our jobs, they're running the political sphere now, more and more and more, the closer we get to the Civil War, they're taking everything and they're changing things. So the ways in which Creoles have continued to identify today has really been a rebellion of sorts against Americanization. It's been a rebellion against told who you were. It's been a rebellion for the sake of autonomy and agency over who our people are and how we identify. So yeah, I hope I don't want to go on too long, but that's what it is. It's something that we've not chosen for ourselves, and it means something different in the language. It all ties back to the language. If you want to understand a people and the way that they think, learn their language. So it simply just doesn't mean the same thing for us, especially even today, those of us who have continued speaking these languages. There's a different connotation when you're speaking a different language. There's a different perspective when you're speaking a different language. There's a different worldview.
Knowing that language changes worldview. In the past, we saw folks such as Rodolphe Lucien de Dune, who would write that there was a difference between the Latin Negro and the Anglo-Saxon Negro. Now, I do know that you have advocated for Louisiana Creoles to be considered a part of the Latin community. Why is that such?
Well, it's not that I've advocated for us to be a part of the Latin community. We are Latin people. Latin simply means that you are a group of people who comes from a Romance-speaking background. So our three main languages are Louisiana Creole, Louisiana French, and Louisiana Spanish. And it also has to do, again, with the religion. And Creoles today are overwhelmingly, predominantly Catholic. Save that, you can still even look towards our legal system in Louisiana, where where our motherland is, right? That legal system is the same system with minor adjustments here and there that is used throughout the rest of Latin America today. So the culture is Latin. Specifically, though, I think that what you may be getting at is the 2010 census campaign that myself and Dr. Landry started to get Louisiana Creole put onto the census. The reason for that was because this was the first time that ethnicity on the census was separated from race. So you could pick a race, black, white, whatever it was, and then you can also choose your ethnicity. And two things special happened that year as well is that there was the ability, there's Hispanic or other Latino, and the ability to write in what that other ethnicity is. So what we encourage people to do, we started the campaign to get people to use the box that says Hispanic or other Latino under the premise that Latino is merely the Spanish translation for Latin. And we communicated with the Census Bureau, who gave, after having explained to them what we were trying to accomplish, what we were doing, they gave us our full support and they agreed. And so, yeah, this is simply what we were trying to do, is get Louisiana Creoles and Cajuns on the census so that we could start to see some funds that get distributed into our communities for very specific needs that Louisiana Creole people have.
With the idea that Louisiana Creole is an ethnic group, we do know historically that white folks in Louisiana who come from the same backgrounds were considered Creole, such as the phrase, all Cajuns are Creole, but not all Creoles are Cajun. Leo, coming from a community that had very much a racial tension going on while you were growing up and even before you were growing up, how was your perspective on whites being a part of the group?
Oh, okay, yeah. You know, being New Orleans, one of the major cities in the state, and also was also a hub for the civil rights and stuff like that. So a lot of the, region was very charged racially, politically. So, so for us, like, black and white was so, very centered because of the politics, that the political atmosphere that we were in. So for us, like I say, New Orleans also being a port city, you having all these people moving in this region and stuff like that, and you having families who are coming from like communities that were black but that were in Creole by culture, if you get what I'm saying. So a lot of us were, black Creoles, black slash African American. We were linking up. We were living in communities because a lot of the redlining and stuff was going on. So, and then in terms of being Creole, um, so this is TikTok term, white tea. So some of y'all don't know what that means white. So growing up, Creole was considered as something what they, because the white tea people even was vocalized about it, saying, "Oh, Creole culture and Creole people is someone is black. You know, those are black people." And then you hear white tea people refer, either like you hear the terms German, French, Cajun, uh, or any other ethnicity or whatever of white tea people and stuff like that, because you had a lot of white tea immigrants like Croatian, Hungarians, uh, Sicilian, etc., Irish. So they moved in the area, so it was like Creole was a very distinct on based on blackness, and also Creole culture in this area, in this region, tends to be heavily populated with black people. So it just that kind of like you know made the picture of the culture here, and it was always considered as a black / Creole culture. So that's how it was focused in my region.
We now have Dr. Christoph Landry with us, also another figure in the Creole revitalization movement. Also, he was mentioned earlier by Cliff about his dissertation. Dr. Christoph Landry, I have two questions for you, considering that you showed up a little bit later. When did this distinction between whites being Cajun and blacks being Creole occur, and why? And second part of that question is, why might we be seeing a revitalization and resurgence of quote unquote Cajun people reconnecting or reappropriating the term Creole today?
Well, thank you very much. I don't sound as microphone perfect as you, Talib. And sorry, I had to work. So I think Leo touched on a little bit of how this happened and played out in Southwest Louisiana, even though he focused on New Orleans. First of all, do you guys hear me? I want to make sure folks can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, cool. Is there an echo?
Only when somebody puts their mic on.
Okay. So in my dissertation, I talk about, which was in history, by the way, for folks who are not aware, in my dissertation, I talk about the bifurcation of Louisiana Creoles. And essentially what that's saying is that in the early 20th century, you start to get this division in Creole identity in Louisiana, and it had everything to do with racialization and Americanization. Early in the 1920s, late 19 teens, so we're talking about between the two world wars, you have a movement among white Southerners throughout the South, but also elsewhere, who were panicking over women's lib and, the flapper movement. And so there was a desire for them to roll back modernization, to get women to be back in the house, cooking all day, cleaning all day, taking care of the household and not working. And we see the rise of these sort of like museums and museum spaces across the South, but also in places like Hawaii and elsewhere, where essentially they're portraying, a simple life, a traditional life. And all of that had to do with, the change in culture after World War I. Louisiana was not immune to that national movement. And so in New Orleans, you get the what a lot of New Orleanians call the Voukerie. I hope I'm pronouncing it. I can't say it like the folks in New Orleans said, Vieux Carré. That's essentially when the Vieux Carré became what we know it today as this like bastion of old Creole New Orleans, where, all the French and Creole and Catholic people lived. Even though by that point, the Vieux Carré was very diversified. You had immigrants from all over the place. Most of the Creoles had moved out to, the Seventh, all over New Orleans by that point. But they wanted to capture this old worldness in the Vieux Carré and build it as this tourism destination. In Southwest Louisiana, you get a similar movement with Dudley LeBlanc, who was a peddler from Vermilion Parish, I say peddler because he sold everything you can imagine, including the well-known hadacol, which was sort of like this medicine that you take and it'll cure everything from herpes to, common colds and headaches and all sorts of stuff like that. But he also was a politician, and people loved him because he was one of the few politicians in the 1920s and 1930s who campaigned in Louisiana French. And, when there are a lot of accounts of when he greeted the crowd with "Mes chers amis," everybody started crying and, screaming. And, it must have hit to the heart of a lot of people in Southwest Louisiana who at that time still were speaking primarily Louisiana French, and a lot of people Kourivini. He linked up with this booster from Opelousas whose name was Susan Anding, and she, her position in the community Southwest Louisiana, but also outside of it, was to promote, the local flavor of things. And so she was instrumental in establishing this tourism that was born in Southwest Louisiana at that time. So we're still talking 1920s, 1930s. But what Dudley and Susan ended up doing was they popularized an Acadian movement in Louisiana. So in New Orleans, you had a push to go towards Frenchness and to abandon Creole, because of course French represented Europe. Europe is, whiteness, right? In Southwest Louisiana, Dudley LeBlanc and Susan Anding promoted a sort of Acadian revitalization, mostly historical, but there was, some delegation, some back and forth between people from Louisiana and people in Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, who were going back and forth during this time that were trying to promote the Acadian story. Now, the problem with the way that Anding and LeBlanc were promoting this is that it was based on Longfellow's poem, Evangeline. And the poem is not a true story. The poem is an epic poem, but it's based on, this love story of this couple who were separated by the Acadian deportation, then found themselves in Louisiana and blah, blah, blah. And so you get this Acadian movement. They were pushing for people to be proud to descend from Acadians. By that point, descendants of Acadians in Louisiana, for the most part, were identifying as Creoles, like everybody else who was French and Creole speaking and Roman Catholic. A lot of them sort of played, especially the bourgeois ones, so like the Demongeaux and the Moutons and some of the Broussards, they played around with this idea of Louisiana Acadians, but that movement really didn't last long in terms of identity. But the tourism side of it did last long. I mean, we see the effects of it today. So the Longfellow State Park System in Louisiana is from that period. That's Susan Anding's mark on history. It didn't last long, but the park system and the tourism did last, right? So folks more or less still continue to play around in Southwest Louisiana, play around with this identity of Creole, a little bit with Acadian, but really the civil rights movement is what changed everything, because then, even before that, they found themselves in this, Americanized black-white world, and you had to choose. If you wanted to get a good job, if you wanted to live in a certain place, you had to choose one of those two. And of course, Acadian descendants who were of European descent, only European descent, were identifying as white. And so they sided with it. And then the civil rights movement starts to happen, and it creates a further divide within the community. And it's sort of like a nominal divide, because of course these people continue to live next door to each other and live in the same neighborhoods. Many of them continue to go to the same Catholic churches, although we see a sort of the rise of these racialized Catholic churches from 1918 onward with Catherine Drexel and some others. But the civil rights movement really created this wedge. And so after the movement finished, and I say finished, in the sort of Voting Rights Act of 1967, a lot of the people who were participating in racism and discrimination and segregation, either tacitly or indirectly, were running for an opportunity to not be taken to the court of law and sued for discrimination or racism. And so we see this rise of these ethnic pride movements and racial pride movements in the late 1960s, 1970s. And Cajun-ism comes out of that. And it really took about, I would say, 20 years for it to work. Initially, there was a lot of fighting between people who today consider themselves Cajuns, because they did not want to identify as Cajun. Cajun, up until that point, was a slur. It was essentially the N-word for basically anyone who was French-speaking, did not want to assimilate into Americanism, who wanted to continue speaking French and Creole and be Catholic and live off the land and all these things. But that movement that started with the late 1960s, 1970s reappropriated that slur into an identity. And that identity, because you also have, in parallel to that, the Black pride movement. And so because you had those things happening at the same time, there was not space for people to cross over into those different movements. And so you get this divide between Cajun, which becomes, the Black version of Creole, the white version of Creole, and then Creole for everyone else, whether mixed or Black or both. That answer your questions? Should have answered both of them.
What about the third question? Why might we see a grand reconnection, I would say, from folks who identify as Cajun also reappropriating the term Creole today? We see notable folks such as Jordan Thibodeau, even had Barry Onsele mention it as well. So why might we be seeing that?
Yeah, so about 20 years ago, when I was an undergrad at UL Lafayette, this was very taboo to talk about publicly. People would talk about it sort of behind closed doors, but publicly, it made a lot of people uncomfortable. Things really started to change, I would say, once we started teaching KV online. Cliff and I and some others, Debbie Clifton was teaching it at UL Lafayette. And so there was more access to it. And especially when we started making it known that a lot of Cajuns speak Kourivini as a first language instead of French, that really opened up a can of worms, because those folks had started to call, KV Cajun French, because the association of Creole with non-whites, and so they started calling it Cajun French. But once we started getting these recordings of, white identified people speaking KV out into the public, that was, I would say, and Cliff can maybe respond to this too, I would say that was like an early start to that. Then when I started working on my dissertation and started, posting bits and pieces of it as I was working on it, and then once I completed it, then you had like a whole historical dissertation that documents that whole process. And there was no room left for people to hide and say, oh no, he's just making this stuff up. It's all literally documented in, Louisiana records and stuff. And so I think before that, you had a lot of people who were sort of underground and who were open to it, and maybe who felt like, I don't know, something with this Cajun narrative doesn't really seem quite right. How is it that we have our neighbors who are Black, we call them Black and we call them Creole, but they have our same last name, they speak French just like us, they eat the same foods, we eat gumbo and okra, and pepper, that stuff doesn't grow in Canada. It doesn't really make much sense. And so I think once we started getting the historical sources out to the public, then you get sort of a larger group of people, number of people who are Cajun identified before that, to start coming back to Creole identity. Cliff, jump in. As you were around, you remember that.
Yeah, I know it very well. They I don't know. I don't know that there's really anything to add to that. I think it was spot on. You start to see, you're seeing now. Yeah, the only thing I'll add to that is they have, Christoph won't mention it, but he received a lot of H8 for publicizing that, for making that publicly known. And we joke and say that they ran him out of Louisiana because he did his ran him out of the country because he did his doctoral program in the UK. And so we joke and say, yeah, they ran him out. But it's so very interesting that now you see this return to Creole identity by people who have fervently identified as Cajun for the last 30 to 40 years or so. Now that certain certain figures in the Cajun movement, as a matter of fact, one they call the Godfather of the Cajun movement, Barry Ancelet, he was two years or so ago, he did an interview and has confirmed everything that Dr. Landry here just said. And it's wild to look at the comments and then some from people that we know, some from people who we remember, were telling us that, were telling Christoph he was lying, saying to us that this was propaganda. And now it takes, let's just call it what it is. It takes a white man to come out and say it in order for it to be valid.
Yeah, that's 100% right. I mean, I didn't I didn't mention it, but my whole dissertation, there was a revolt in Louisiana, and not just because of my dissertation, but it was also because at the same time you had Nathan Rabelais, whose documentary Finding Cajun sort of explores, how Cajun identity came to be. He interviewed me and Cliff and some others in there, including, white identified people who ordinary South Louisianians would call Cajun. And, they were in the documentary saying, well, why is everything called Cajun? I don't descend from Acadians and, like things like that. So you had that, plus you had Joseph Dunn, who was working at Codafield before that, but he's well known in the tourism space in Louisiana, who had been saying all these things for a while. And so you have those three things that are happening essentially at the same time between 2017 2020, before COVID, and it really, really, really shook people in Louisiana. There was a nonprofit in Lafayette that was sort of revitalized and was essentially operating in a closed atmosphere. Like, most people didn't know that it existed, but they were having meetings and things like that. And it turned into like a Cajun nationalist organization. And Joseph, myself, Nathan Rabelais, Bennett Boyd Anderson, a whole bunch of other people were targets for this organization, saying that we were trying to kill Cajun identity. I shouldn't say that, trying to unalive Cajun identity, Cajun memory, Cajun history, Cajun genealogy, all of this stuff. They were accusing me, because I work at Ancestry, of re-baptizing Cajun people as Creoles. I don't have that power within this corporation, but that's what they were doing. So it was operating as a Cajun nationalist sort of propaganda organization. And at the same time, you had a cadre of people, some of them at UL, who were trying to make me an early sort of example of what became of Jason Arday in the UK. I'm sure everyone is aware of that story now. But they essentially accused me of the exact same thing, until my university said, and this took place over a period of 6 years or so after I finished my dissertation, where they were writing the university saying if the university wouldn't revoke my PhD, that they would file a lawsuit. They were accusing me of plagiarism. and on and on and on. My university, of course, did an investigation, and of course, there was no plagiarism. I changed a couple things here and there in it to clarify some things in it, but there was no plagiarism. And at that point, my university said that we're closing this shut because there is no evidence of your plagiarizing this Shane Bernard's book, The Cajuns. And so when I tell you guys this shook, all three of those things shook South Louisiana. It really, really, really was a pivotal moment in terms of identity. And after that, you start to get a whole bunch of formerly Cajun identified folks say openly, well, no, this makes more sense than what we were taught. Like, of course, this, doesn't make sense about we're just descendants of Acadians, and somehow after 250 years, we still speak the same as people in, Nova Scotia and in New Brunswick. Of course, we don't eat the same food. Like, that stuff doesn't make sense. This nuanced version makes a lot more sense. And so here we are today. It's very different in terms of the climate, I would say, than 20 years ago or even 15 years ago.
Ibu, would you say that some black folks in the Creole community have an issue with white folks or Cajuns trying to reappropriate the term Creole today?
I mean, again, speaking from where I'm at currently, which is New Orleans, I do notice that I think this idea of Creole being black and Cajun being white has solidified and really set into the community. So I do think when people see white people identify as Creole, sometimes it's like how they envision someone who's white practicing voodoo or claiming anything, like if they're African American, claiming hip hop. Or I think now that it's become so solidified in the community, there are people that are definitely resistant to white people now starting to claim the Creole identity, especially with, as we've been discussing, this renaissance and this more like increase in investment in the community and the culture, the popularity. It's like, oh, now that this is an acceptable title, now you want to claim it. Granted that we still have this dichotomy between Cajun and Creole, and which is favored, but I do think there's a growing presence in the Creole community that are willing and are eager to invest and participate in this renaissance. And with that, in the same time, I feel like there's some gatekeeping that might happen.
Shall we, on that note, do you think that there is a separation between speakers of both Louisiana French and Louisiana Creole and non-speakers on this matter? As we tend to see that Louisiana Creole speakers and Louisiana French speakers tend to accept it more often than non-speakers.
Apologies, I might need a bit more context. So those who speak Louisiana French and Kourizini are more accept like they accept more um, this kind of raceless identity of Creolity, or what exactly are you saying?
So, what we see today is, especially with younger French and Creole speakers, that they are more accepting of whites and Cajuns reappropriating the Creole term. However, we don't necessarily fully see it on the non-speaker side. So what might be the for lack of better terms, the décalage between these two groups?
So purely just based off my experiences, so those that I have been in contact with who speak the language, I feel like they have a bit of more fundamental understanding of what our identity is, and I feel like that is the reason why they speak the languages or that they're trying to speak the language. So I feel that they understand that our history wasn't operating within this binary. Not to like make blanket statements, but this is just like very general. I feel like those that don't speak the language or have no interest in it typically, not all, typically are those that aren't as invested in the identity and the community. And I feel like they are more receptive, or they have been fed this idea of a racial binary, and therefore their, not say their claim, but their way of relating to Creole identity and understanding Cajun identity is to subsume the identity in this binary. I feel like their understanding may be limited, um, to that understanding, and that's why they're not as receptive to this racelessness or this transracial ethnic group.
Leo, coming from a non-speaking background, would you agree?
Hold on, give me 1 second. Ask another question. Hold on, give me 1 second.
Okay, I guess I'll move on to Cliff. Well, Cliff, I'll ask you the same question. Even though you are a speaker, would you agree?
I'm so sorry, but you would have to repeat the question for me. I was responding to some messages.
Ooh, this panel though. All right.
I'm on double duty. Forgive me.
So the question that was posed to Xiaowei was that what we tend to see, at least with younger speakers of Louisiana French and Louisiana Creole, is that they tend to accept Cajuns reappropriating the term Creole more often than non-speakers. And when I asked him about that, he said it's due to the fact that some might not fully accept the racial binary of the Creole identity. And I asked him what might be that cause. Unfortunately, I can't fully restate what he said, but I can pose you the same question. So, what, in your opinion, what might be that cause for
I
a
think that,
decalage?
yeah, I think if I understand the question correctly, I think um, ooh, that's a messy question actually. I think, oh, my answer to that is I'm trying to figure out how to answer it in a sophisticated way. I believe that certain groups of people, certain groups of white people, let's just say it, um, if there is a way, Creole has always been understood to be something, well, not always, but there were certain periods of time in Louisiana's history where Creoles have been understood to be more desirable. As Dr. Landry pointed out earlier, Cajun at some point was a pejorative. It was fighting words for some. I've even read some, I forget where, but I remember reading somewhere where someone said that they were more offended by being called Cajun than they were being called the N word. And so I think, honestly, with certain people, there is a natural tendency to, as we're kind of getting re-educated on what Creole actually means. And I think there's an opportunity. I think the people that we're talking about, who again are more likely to accept French and younger French and Creole speaking Cajuns. I think that's what you said, to reappropriate the term Creole. I think there's still always been a lingering sense of sophistication to the term, a particular idea of a particular type of person in mind. And so it kind of goes with what you're saying. I'm still kind of doing both, but yeah, I hope that is. I'm going to leave it there for fear that I can't really answer that as eloquently as I would like to on with what we're doing. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Leo, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back now. Answer the question so I can have a full understanding.
Answer the question you
I
said.
mean, I mean, say that. I'm sorry, I'm doing something too at the same time. So, what was the question again? Like Cliff said.
why might there be a separation between non-speakers and speakers when it comes to accepting Cajuns reappropriating the term Creole today?
Oh, that's an easy question. Um, we already know what it is. Some people in our families were kind of was taught that, oh, Creole, that's that French N-word identity. Um, I've heard it. A couple of us heard it. A lot of the time we feel like they said, "Oh, I'm Cajun. I'm not Creole. I'm not a N word." Yeah, I know I can't say it on here, but yeah, that's and we're kind of offended about it because we're like, well, hey, when we was proud to say we were Creole or we were shamed out of our Creole at the same time, now all of a sudden you want us to accept you as Creole. Now I get it, historical content. Uh, for historical reference, yes, they are Creole. But some of us who've been, like they say, thugging, with the whole Creole identity feel a certain way. Like, okay, now you want to transition it over to back to Creole. Nah, buddy, nah, I don't like that. So I see why. But also too, like I say, there's some truth and historical context behind the Acadian being Creole. So there you have it.
Christoph, you would like to add on to that? Dr. Landry?
Yeah, I think there is for those of us who speak these our community languages, I think there is a clear difference in how speakers relate to the historical context and non-speakers, because the speakers actually are the ones who are more, I would say, commonly, before 15 years ago, they were the ones who were more likely to say, yeah, well, when I was growing up, on était tous des Creoles. We were all Creoles when I was growing up. That is, I would say, normal for them, for the speakers. But for the non-speakers whose identity had revolved primarily with race as the most important of their identities, there it's a little bit harder to understand the historical context, but also understand the cultural one, because they don't speak, and so they wouldn't have those types of conversations with their parents or with their grandparents, and they probably would have been in the house or somewhere and heard their grandparents or their parents saying this in French or in Creole, but because they don't speak, they wouldn't have understood. So I think you have one group, the speakers, who value the ethnic identity more than the non-speakers, who value race more than anything else, and there's a disconnect between those two groups. I'm not saying that the folks who speak these languages are not bigoted. I'm not saying that they don't have discriminatory thoughts and actions and things like that, but it is generally true that the folks who are French and Creole and Spanish speaking in Louisiana, they tend to identify historically, but also more recently, with Creole identity versus the non-speakers.
We we cannot allow everybody to come up. Unfortunately, I would love for everybody to come up, but we cannot allow everybody to come up. So if you have a question, I please ask that you either put it in the comments or send it directly to me, and I will be able to reverberate that question and point it to the direction of who you want it to go to. So yeah, if you have any questions, now is your time. Send it in the comments.
Yeah, brother, answer some good questions too. we got them.
And if we can, I'm particularly interested in hearing from, hopefully they're here. There's, a lot of people. The reason why we decided to hold this particular live class is because we're trying to bridge a gap between some of us who've grown up in and around with other Creole community in the culture. We've heard your voices, and you say that you feel or have felt maybe rejected by some members of the community. So we really would like to. I would personally like to hear your thoughts and questions.
So from Kwaku, we have, and this is for Dr. Landry, seeing the rise of the language, what are you hoping to see? I think that is what he will say.
Good question. I've always said, and Cliff and Talib and some others who've been around for a while will attest to this. I've always said the only thing I care about, with respect to the languages, is that people are relearning it. And I use that term deliberately, relearn, because for a lot of Creoles, but also Cajuns, our parents, grandparents, people we grew up hearing the language, right? But didn't always have an opportunity to learn to speak it. And so it's not the same thing as learning, a whole language that you had no access to or you never heard before. So I use relearning. But my thing is, linguistically, the most important thing for me has always been that people relearn the language, use the language, and pass it on. You can talk about me in the language, you can fight with Cliff in the language, you can fight with Talib in the language, Barry Onsley, whoever, Jordan Thibodeau. As long as you're using the language, that's the most important thing for me. And now I would say, even looking back 15, 20 years ago, the sort of energy around KV is amazing. Online, in the social media spaces, I would say that there is more enthusiasm and utilization of KV than there is for Louisiana French. The Francophones in our community, they're watching and they want a piece of this, which is why you see some of the historic, Francophone organizations like Alliance Française and Codophile and some others starting to bring on people who can teach KV at those institutions. And that is important because it's hot right now. It's really, really popular. Every time I connect online, social media, I see new people who are like messaging me or commenting in a live or in a thread in KV. And I'm like, who the hell are these people? So many people. 15, 20 years ago, we essentially knew everyone who was online, who spoke this language, at least who made it known that they spoke the language. Now it's impossible. I can't keep up. So I think that's going great. And I think as people, to sort of tie it back to the previous question, as people speak the language more, I think there's going to be a natural reorientation in terms of ethnic identity towards Creole identity as well. So the two work hand in hand.
Préparez-vous à tourner à gauche.
You have
Y'all like these messy questions. And I know Leo is waiting to say something. It's partially because of the way that the ethnic movements in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s played out. So while Southwest Louisiana was created a whole, sort of legislative district within South Louisiana separate from New Orleans, which became known as Acadiana. While that was happening and Cajun-ism was being promoted in Southwest Louisiana, New Orleans also had their own tourism cultural level before that in New Orleans. Some, academics, of course, especially historians, genealogists, have, for a long time spoken about the Saint-Domingue to New Orleans connection. But at the popular level, you don't really start to see that until like the 1990s. And it was sort of like a reaction to the rise of Cajunism. So you get Cajunism, which is like pointing toward whiteness in Southwest Louisiana. And then New Orleans starts to look towards Haiti, which is, ostensibly Creole-ness and also blackness. So I would say that the 1980s, 1990s, that's really when all of this started to emerge that way. And then you also have the fact that because Cajunism consumed so much of the cultural currency in Southwest Louisiana, it sort of muted Creoles in a way. You still had people, in their communities who identified as Creole and things like that, but Creole also became sort of a bad word. Leo mentioned this earlier. It became sort of a bad word for people of color, and so Cajunism muted it, and Creole was still kind of there. But New Orleans, because of that historic connection to Haiti, Haitians, of course, speak predominantly Haitian Creole. It was like a natural sort of fit for New Orleans to be. Now, in New Orleans, it wasn't just, Haitian. So like in our families, Creole families in South Louisiana, historically, when they spoke of family coming from Haiti, they weren't thinking of Haitians as we phenotypically think about them today. Generally speaking, they're thinking about quadroons, mulattoes, octoroons, people with means, people with money who went to, balls and all of this crap. Not about Haitians as neg. So there's an interesting, they didn't make that distinction. Oh, well, my people were from Saint-Domingue. They weren't from Haiti. But essentially that's what they were doing, because their sort of memory of Saint-Domingue is one where you had a lot of mixed race happening. But Haiti is very different in their minds. So New Orleans, had their own thing going on with Creoles who were mixed race, and who, because it had become a bad word, you couldn't really identify that way in public, but they continued to marry other Creoles, they continued to go to church with other Creoles, and things like that. Hope I don't get I'm not going to use that term, lâché, for saying that. Talib, you can translate if you want.
I'm good. So, TJ, I'm not skipping your question. I'm just going to use your question a little bit later on. From Janae, Alex Janae, and I think this goes for anybody on the panel. How do we feel about people wanting to learn Kurivini just because it is now popular but aren't Creole? And this is for anybody on the panel.
No. Y'all can answer that one.
Yeah, I'll jump in. There is a danger in that, right? Because if the language gets displaced from the Creole community that created the language, right, then what happens in terms of identity? What happens in terms of cultural practices, traditions, memory, recipes, folk tales? What happens to all those gems that are so precious to us if the language gets picked up by a whole bunch of people who geographically don't live in the community and who aren't really, I would say, close to many people in the community. But you're always going to have a certain number of people who are not from a given community who are going to be learning languages. Some of them because they're, linguophiles, people who just love to learn languages just because. Some of them are going to be because, oh, well, crap, this language sounds really cool. I'm going to pick it up and maybe I'm going to make some friends along the way. You're always going to have some of that. I haven't seen much evidence of there being an entire community of people who are not Creoles themselves learning KV, but it could happen. I'm curious, and I'm not on in the social media spaces as much as you guys, so maybe you're seeing something different from me.
Yeah.
This, go ahead.
Sorry. You want to move on?
You can go ahead and answer it.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with Dr. Landry. I think that while admirable, and while potentially helpful, I think it's particularly perhaps pernicious that we see large groups of people from outside of the community wanting to learn. I I see it commonly represented in on this app in particular, where people will say, Kudivini, Black American language or African American language, I'm learning it, and separating it from the people, as Dr. Landry said. I've even been warned, like by one of my students who knew someone who had, whose goal was to learn it to treat it as a language for the African diaspora. I think that there's a danger in that, just like Dr. Landry alluded to, because then you start to disconnect it away from the people, you disconnect it away from the culture. And you know what, this is, we haven't had this question, but it's such a good segue into gatekeeping. We tend to think of gatekeeping as something that's inherently negative. We think of gatekeeping as keeping people out, keeping people away. Rather, what I like to think of gatekeeping as, and I think is a fair analysis, is gatekeeping is to protect what's on the inside of the bounds. You have a gate around your house because the things and the people that are inside of that boundary are precious to you, because there's a need for protection. There's a need to preserve what's there. So gatekeeping is not something that is inherently negative. And we have to protect. Well, I say it all the time. Y'all hear me say this. I know I'm like a broken record at this point, but our language and is in such a vulnerable condition, and we cannot allow people to own the narrative of who Louisiana Creoles are when they have no connection to the culture, or even if they do have a connection, when they're so far removed from it that what they would be doing is essentially trying to create something new from their understanding of what their desire is, that they from what how they see the language, how they see the culture when they think about it. So I think those of us who speak it, I think it's incumbent upon people to overstate, when people are coming to learn the language, that this is a Louisiana Creole thing, and it's not that you can't share that. I've always said that my personal vision for Kudivini one day is for people to, if ever you're going to New Orleans, if ever you're vacationing in Louisiana, wherever, South Louisiana, I want people to have to know, oh, I got to go to the store and get a Kudivini for Dummies book, because I know that when I get here, I need to be able to speak to the people. But again, even when people are out on the outside learning it, you're learning it to connect with the people of this land. You're learning it to connect to the people who this language belongs to.
Now, Cliff, you have another question. This is also from the Uncajun Prez. Have people ever told you to market Kudivini as Cajun Creole due to the algorithm and SEO before?
They wouldn't. They wouldn't dare. That's my answer. So, in short, no, and they wouldn't want to, because the lashing that would come.
So I was sent a question from Devin. And the question is, what are y'all
Wait,
doing
did it cut out? I'm so sorry to cut you. Did it? I saw that my answer get cut out.
No, I heard it. I don't know if everybody else did. But this question is from Devin, sent through personal DM. The question is, what are y'all doing in the Creole movement to highlight women or to promote women's voices?
I'm not sure that I understand the question, or I'm not sure that I understand the. I don't mean this harshly, but the relevance of the question, the the Creole. Our at least I can speak for. I think I speak for myself and Dr. Landry when I say this. Our main goal is that people from this community first learn the language. So I don't know. I mean, we if your question is what are we doing to highlight the voices of female women identified activists, I don't know that that's something we have to do. We have those members. First person that comes to mind is Adrienne Guillory Chapman, who I was her first instructor. I'm so proud to say that because of the things she's gone on to do. She's actively teaching Kudivini. She's a teacher, and she actively teaches Kudivini in her school to her students in Chicago. She's the author of what we know to be the first children's book in Kudivini. She's also the person who single-handedly created the Memrise app for learning Louisiana Creole. So, yeah, I don't know that I don't think that the question actually speaks to what the purpose of the movement is. The purpose of the movement is simply to get Louisiana Creoles, and their descendants, the people genetically and culturally connected to these communities, to learn the language. I hope that's a satisfactory answer.
Okay. This next question is from.
Oh, wait a minute. Shaway brought up a very good point. I know this your show, Tali, but I should have. Cam is a great person for that question too. So as the only woman on the panel, I think she should have a voice in that.
Cam, would you like to respond?
Can you ask the question one more time?
The question was, and I wish I could go back to the DM, but the question was, what are y'all doing in the Creole movement to what was it, promote and advocate,
To
or
highlight the voices
to
of women,
highlight,
I believe.
yeah, to highlight the voices of women in the movement?
Um, I mean, I know what I do is like if I see that there's a woman doing something, and I will usually like try to like reshare or push it out or give as much support as possible, because like just I guess being a woman in any group, you sometimes have to work twice as hard to get the same amount of either respect or attention. And I mean, I don't feel like I've faced like too much, I guess, misogyny, I guess, as far as like being within the group, but I also haven't been like trying to climb any ladders. So, like, I mean, I am a woman, but I also don't, I mean, I don't really feel like I'm the best person, the best woman in the group. Well, not on the panel, but in the group to ask, well, within the community. So, yeah, this one I think is more specific. Hey, Cliff. Some people
Is anybody
found,
there? Can y'all hear me?
yeah,
Tali?
we're all
We can
here.
hear you. We can hear you.
Yeah, I can hear you.
What happened?
Yeah.
Did it freeze for a second or something?
I don't know, bro. Um,
It's a flat picture.
y'all can hear us up in the chat. For the ones you can hear, for the two you can't.
You guys can't hear us?
Niggas, you can go to the next question.
We were really interesting.
Some of them can't.
Maybe
Oh
it's
yeah, they can hear
maybe
now. Yeah.
okay. I don't know when I went out. Okay. So yeah, some of my family I knew is from the Delta, Mississippi Delta, and some of them were from Mobile, Alabama. Some were from Louisiana.
Is
I have
anybody
two.
Tali? Are you still there?
You guys
I'm
can't hear
here.
me again?
Okay. Where were we? I don't think anybody's speaking.
I was.
Cam is speaking. She was
Oh,
answering the question for Kiara. I can restate the question though. The
I
Okay.
don't
question.
hear anything. Cam, can you say something?
Hi,
I
Cliff.
don't
Do
hear
you hear
Cam.
me?
That's what the problem is. I
I'll
okay.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
restate the question and then I'll let you know when she's finished.
Okay, I'm gonna log in from my other phone. All right, go ahead.
So the question was, how do those who grew up in flat blackness and thought everything we did was quote unquote black culture embrace the fullness of the culture under the proper ethnic identity?
Sorry. Okay. Okay. So yeah, again, I grew up in Chicago. My family is from the Mississippi Delta, and while doing my tree, I wanted to see where they were from before that. Found some people in Mobile, Alabama, um, bring drinking, and Louisiana. People moved up there, and then again up during the Great Migration. And one thing I find interesting is Chicago in particular is very segregated. So putting all of the black people in one place within a major city kind of flattened everybody's, little like subcultures or smaller groups into one big thing. And we're like a century later now, and it really just never occurred to me like that there was anything different or like nothing seemed out of place or foreign or off because there's probably a lot of people and it all kind of melanged together. So coming into the community now, and there's certain things that I realize are Creolite that survived from like the few branches in my family that were Creole, that it's interesting to see and be able to put things into context. And I mean, my main interest is like history and language and culture and how all of those things work together. So being able to not only put that history into context, but put my own ancestors, one, put their names back on their family trees, but be able to contextualize who they were and why they moved and where they moved and what was happening. And then being able to see the difference in how those migrations manifested in my life and in comparison to those who didn't. Like there's it's little things sometimes, little tiny whispers, but it's just very fascinating.
So we're gonna have one last question, and this was the question that I held off on earlier. This is from TJ. Now, I guess I would expect everybody to answer this. In my honest opinion. So the question was, where do we go from here? And whoever wants to start can start.
What was the question? I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting panel.
No,
Where
just answer the.
where do we go from here?
I'm just holding off to let other people who haven't spoken as much get a moment, but I can start if y'all want.
Go ahead.
Leo, go ahead.
No, I'm good. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll just start off the questions. So I feel like there's a lot of different areas that we are actively trying to promote in terms of the Creole culture. Um, in terms of like language, I think as it pertains to Louisiana French and Guinea, I do think the goal there is to expand the number of speakers, but also ensure that people are speaking it quote unquote correctly, but also retaining its roots within the Louisiana Creole community as it pertains to identity, something that I feel like I'm more involved in. It is promoting the cultural integrity, um, just like of our identity, our food, our language, to ensure that as we progress or become increasingly more modernized, that we still remain as a people within the public imagination. I feel like those are the two spaces that I'm more aware of at this point.
For my part, I think we just need to
Okay, I'll go
continue
next.
to.
I, as this conversation, we again when we envisioned this, we were speaking to Creoles who were reconnecting, people of the diaspora, or more appropriately, people who are of Creole descent. And the work that I do, the work that Dr. Landry does, and other people on the panel, is directly geared towards language reclamation and language revitalization, making sure the language survives. I think it's incumbent upon people who are looking to get in touch with these communities. There is no reason that someone should feel like they don't know where to go for resources, because we're all very here. We're all very loud about what's happening and connecting to those things. The work has started decades ago, and the work continues. So I do think that one of the things that we can do collectively is start to put our forces together to see how we can spread the word a bit more. Talib, you've done a great job with the publication that you and a team of others do have come out with, which is Jujadi. This helps, and what we really need is marketing to let people know that things are happening, because what's happening is that people are just kind of making stuff up because they don't necessarily know where to go to find things. So the work is there, the work is continuing. I think the challenge or the focus should be how to make the work that's already being done and that never ceases more visible. So figuring out how to do that. Between us all here, we have different platforms, and some of us work on both of those platforms, and everyone has different expertise. Um, I got people with great organization or organizers on my team, people who are marketers on our team. So really using our collective education and experience to make the movement bigger, and educating people who are of the culture, the community, of the diaspora, of descent, educating them and letting them see who we are, letting them learn about who we are, and promotion of this language. And again, I'll land by saying the language is so important. It is so important, and it cannot be separated from the culture. Even if you never speak it, that doesn't mean you're not Creole. But one of the founding principles, one of the foundational things to a culture is that culture's language. I land.
Leo, would you like to add?
Yeah, I sure do. Um, that's an interesting question because it speaks so loud and is so many volumes because it could mean so many things. Where do we go from here? Well, I'll tell you this. Um, where we go from this is network. I've been telling people this with social media is fun. You're supposed to be networking with people, connecting back with roots, connect back with your people back home. If even your family haven't been here for so long, reconnecting back with your language, uh, certain practices, incorporate a lot of things in your life to make you want to be tied to your Creole heritage and stuff like that. So where we go so far from here. And like I said, I think everybody just answered the whole big question. It's like get in get in communal settings with people. That's what a culture and a community and a people group is based off. It's not based on an individual person, it's based on a collective. And that's what I want people to understand what it is to be Creole too, to move forward in, is learning how to continue what we always had, have this beautiful collective communal identity. So I need y'all to do that. I know some people don't want to always interact with people. That's fine, but there's going to be a point where you have to learn something from the collective and from people who are going to help you learn about your own roots and stuff. So that's where I land at.
We'll go Dr. Landry, and then we're going to finish off with Kami, and then she also has an announcement to make.
Well, I think Ibu didn't respond yet. No, I think what Cliff and Leo said are spot on, and focus on different things. You know, Cliff is more concerned about language continuance. Leo is more concerned about people from the diaspora who are disconnected from our community to reconnect with the community. And he said it beautifully how you do that. You know, you go out, you network on social media, you find people who are still in the communities where your family or families came from, learn about the local traditions in that particular community, and also learn about, you know, Creole culture, Creole-ness, Creolite, more generally in Louisiana. All those things are important. I would also add that TikTok is not a history degree. TikTok is not an anthropology degree or linguistics. For a really in-depth knowledge of all those different aspects of the community's history and culture, genealogy and people, you need to enroll in a history class. LSU is the flagship state university in Louisiana, but you could also learn that at UL Lafayette. You can learn it at Southern University. You can learn it at Xavier. There are many institutions in Louisiana where you can learn it. And I would just caution, pay attention to who you learn from online. There are a lot of people who are using social media to earn a buck, and that's fine. People need to work, right? But there are some people on social media who are also using this to spread misinformation, because the misinformation drives engagement. Engagement drives money. On social media, engagement is money. And there are people who are on social media who are doing just that every day, saying outlandish things that are ahistoric, things that don't make sense linguistically, and so on and so forth. So be very careful who you learn from on social media, but it's all about reconnecting with the community. Like Leo said, and like Cliff said, part of that experience should also include the languages. They're still spoken in South Louisiana, not as much in New Orleans. The New Orleanians are going to give me a lot of pushback on this, but not as much in New Orleans. There are people, individuals in New Orleans who still speak, but often they're from St. James Parish or Bonfouca in St. Tammany Parish, or from St. Martin or Iberia. Go west of New Orleans, where St. James and Vacherie, New Roads and Lakeland and other places where these languages are still spoken. Reconnect with the people there, establish relationships with them, and you'll see the fruit of your effort. It's going to take effort. It is not easy, especially with language. You will not master it overnight. This is a lifelong project that you have to commit yourself to and be disciplined with and treat it as seriously as you would learning, or taking a degree or course at a university. Step up. C'est tout.
All right, Ibu, do you have anything to add before we pass it on to Kami to finish it off?
The only thing, I mean, I don't know if you guys can hear me. There's a lot of people in here. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yep.
The only thing that I wanted to say is that, like we're doing now, I think we need to continue to foster environments for those that are disconnected from the culture to be able to connect with the culture. A lot of the community, and I don't think we should miss this, is still present in Louisiana, and a lot of that community still doesn't even know what the culture is, and still need to, like Christoph said, go west, go into the community, get out of the big cities. So I do think we need to have environments not only for those in the diaspora or satellite communities, but even for those that are still in Louisiana, because that at the end of the day is the heartland. That is a lot where the lack of information is where we need to, I guess, invest more.
Kami, you're our last one.
Okay, I just had a short announcement. This past week, I've heard a lot of people saying that they're having a really hard time finding resources for like credible places to learn things or find things related to Creole history, culture, Côte d'Ivoire. So I took it upon myself to just create a Google Doc list, and within that Google Doc, there's also some other people who've made link trees, and I hyperlinked a bunch of resources that I am going to now put in the chat. You are now a viewer of that Google Doc. There are some resources that you guys can have and see and share with each other. And on top of that, I'm working with Logan Delafosse right now. We are actively building a website that will house as many resources as we can think of and find and that we can update in real time. Like I'm writing the HTML code and the CSS. I've been doing that for like the past like what 2-3 days. I don't know. So I don't think he's still in here right now, but I just sent him. I made the like the wireframe. I made the structure, the skeleton basically of the website. So there's different pages that are going to have like there's one for history and culture, one for language, one for media and music, one for called Shop Creole. So if there's someone who has like a small business, if there's someone who wants to promote their art, you can find them right there. And we can cross promote each other. If there's people who want to be able to work together, you're like, I need a graphic designer. Boom, there's a graphic designer within your community. You want to be able to, find an accountant. It's like, hey, I'm working on this, I'm working on that, I'm working on this, I'm working on that. There's also free copies of certain texts. So to live Creole, there's a free PDF of that in there. There is there will be a bunch of Logan had a bunch of YouTube videos that would be very helpful. So I'm going to talk to him about how best to organize those within the website. And when that's ready, you will be the first to know. And hopefully that can help people who were having a hard time finding the credible sources. Because like Christoph said, like you can't just get information from just anywhere. And if people don't know how to find that, then, there's other people who are happy to help. If there's something that you would like, if you have a business and you would like that to be highlighted on the website, message it to me. If there's a book that you think would be really pertinent to history, culture, or language, message it to me. I'll add it in. And that's about it. And here's the link one more time. So we just have the Google Doc in the meantime before the website's done. Thanks.
Thank you. Don't forget to put that in your bio, as the link might not work on here.
Oh, good point.
Today we've had a really, really interesting conversation. I do thank every single panelist that came up. Shawi, Ibu, Dr. Landry, Leo, Cam,
And Cliff, I thank y'all again for y'all's insight and your perspectives. And I also thank the viewers. I thank the viewers for coming in, interacting, asking good questions, and ensuring that this live was not only liked but also shared, so it can get out even more. That is it on my end. I was your panelist, and thank y'all again.
Our moderator. Yeah, I want y'all to thank you so much, Talib, for hosting this event. We really appreciate y'all. I think you did an amazing job. Outstanding. So y'all give it up for Talib. Oh wait. Wait. Hold on. Let me see what I did. God dang it! I should have had this ready. Okay, y'all give it up for Talib.